Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The King of Burning Skies by S.M. Gaither. Narrated by Vilinsky. Chapter 1. The Queen had been asleep for weeks. A deep, catatonic sleep. A sleep of the dead. Most within the palace were convinced that it was death that had come for their matriarch. It was simply taking its time about claiming her. "But it will likely only be a matter of days now," the people whispered. "Hours, maybe. Have you seen the way her eyes have turned to glass? The gray shimmer of her skin? The way her wounds weep in spite of every remedy the doctors try?" From sunrise to sunset, the hushed gossip did not stop. But the Crown Prince of Rooks was still not convinced that this was the end. And he was not at all pleased with the way the palace was preparing as though it was. He rounded a corner into the main hall of the South Wing, and for the third time that evening, he saw a familiar scene. Maids scurrying about, draping thin black cloths over every painting and bust and other likeness of the High Queen Zara. He cleared his throat. "Are you fools really inviting death into this palace?" They clutched the black cloths to their chests, turned, and immediately lowered their gazes at the sight of their prince. "If you are all so eager to bury someone, then perhaps I should send you to the south border. I hear the death toll from the latest battles there are approaching the hundreds. You can all go there and make yourselves much more useful by tending to those actual deaths." No reply. He stepped forward, gripped the hilt of the sword sheathed at his hip, tightly, and he tried to keep his voice calm. "Remove these shrouds at once." "Your Highness, the High King's advisors, they said—" "I don't care what they said. I said to take them off. Now!" The two closest to him finally found the courage to briefly meet his eyes. Their lips parted silently. They exchanged a glance with each other, and he could almost see them calculating how much trouble each of their options would cost them. He outranked any advisors, but he did not outrank the High King. And that king would likely be furious with them if they undid their work. So it was only a question of whose fury they would choose to endure. "Now!" he repeated. Finally, the maid who had managed to speak to him before also managed a low bow, and she reached to unhook one corner of the shroud over the nearest painting. But she was moving too slowly. Not enough of her fellow servants were joining her efforts either, and the prince was quickly losing what little patience he had left after a very long and frustrating day. He yanked his sword from its jeweled sheath. Several of the servants gasped. An overreaction, really. The sword wasn't even properly sharpened or balanced, and it was ancient besides. It was merely ornate, a part of the ridiculous regalia that he had been forced to wear that afternoon during a ceremony to welcome Galician nobles. The blade still did a fair enough job of ripping down the thin cloths. He strolled very deliberately down the hall, moving from one edge to the other, and swiping the sword through every shroud he could reach. Some pulled free in one piece, others in tatters, and all eventually fluttered to the ground behind him like blackbirds swirling and flailing down on broken wings. He heard the maids resuming their scurrying, a few of them cursing under their breath as they did. He didn't look back. He kept his sword in his hand, and he kept walking. He walked all the way to the throne room, where he knew Haben would likely still be meeting with those nobles they had earlier welcomed into the Palace of Eyes. The visitors hailed from the court of Lord Eldrin, ruler of the province of Eshner, and they had come to speak in person with the High King regarding those battles along the Kingdom of Valen's southern border, a conversation that had surely put that king in an even more terrible mood than usual. All the same, the prince kept walking. pausing only once he reached the towering double wooden doors of the throne room. A guard stood on either side, completely motionless, extending swords and crossing them in front of the metal, bird-shaped latch that held these doors together. Those swords did not waver even as the prince came close enough that he could have knocked them aside with his own blade. "I will speak with the High King," he announced. "Your Highness, immediately. His Majesty has asked that we not disturb. Go disturb him, or I will do it myself." Another moment of hesitation followed, until finally the guards uncrossed their swords, bowed, and one of them cautiously undid the latch between the doors. The right door creaked open. The raised voices on the other side abruptly stopped. The guard cleared his throat. "Crown Prince Imris, to speak to you, Your Majesty." It had been years since anyone had referred to him as Haben's son, a fact that the prince had been aware of before now, but which struck and unsettled him perhaps more than it ever had as he stepped forward into the shadow of the door and the darkness beyond it. Shadows. Countless shadows. Was the king really so caught up in his own dark, mad persona that he couldn't be bothered to light one of the dozens of proper chandeliers in the throne room? Apparently so. There was only the faint, flickering glow of candelabras to light the faces around the table in the center of the room. The darkness obscured any details of those faces, but Imris assumed they all appeared pretentious and irritable. The High King spoke from that blackness. "Send him in." The guard stopped him with a gloved hand to the chest. "The sword, my prince." He handed it over without protest. But neither guard had the nerve to search him or otherwise question him, and so the dagger sheathed against his back accompanied him into the room. The mood was easy enough to discern as he approached, even if he still could not clearly see faces. Tension hung like another of those shrouds the servants had been placing over his mother's likenesses. Heavy and daunting, and threatening to stifle the air from his lungs, to silence the furious words waiting on his lips. The High King remained seated, but several of his guests stood and offered bows and polite, if stiff, greetings. These were the ones who were perhaps still willing to remain loyal to the High King and his clan, and any potential heir to the highest, so-called uniting throne of the Sundolian Empire, despite their fears and frustrations with the current state of that empire. The prince took a deep breath. The air smelled of dust and tart wine. Countless flasks of that wine were scattered among the guests, and several drops of deep red stained the table's surface. Perhaps the ones still willing to stand for Rook rule are only doing it because they're drunk. He wished he was drunk, now that he thought of it, because then he could have more easily ignored that foreboding weight growing in the pit of his stomach. "My esteemed guests, I beg you to pardon the interruption," the High King said, in a quiet, calculating voice. It was unnerving, the way his brow furrowed, and his head tilted at the exact angle to bring him face to face with Imris, as if he was glaring somehow, even without actual eyes to do it with. "I assume my son has pressing information to share with us. Else he wouldn't have dared to interrupt our meeting." Imris stared straight back at the painted scars beneath that furrowed brow, ignoring the countless other gazes he could feel fixing expectantly on him. "Go on, then. You may speak." Heat crawled up the back of his neck. He bitterly wished that he had already spoken, that he had not given the impression that he really needed the king's permission to speak. He stepped forward, his fists clenched, and in a clear and softly seething voice he said, "Are you aware that your advisors have informed most of the palace staff that your wife is dead, or near enough to it that they should initiate mourning rituals? Or perhaps it was you who did the initial informing?" The High King did not reply, but his smile twitched in one corner, only to immediately return to its placid, easy line. "Don't you think that's rather brazen? Have the gods you supposedly speak to informed you that her time is up? Or do you consider yourself beyond their counsel now?" "The rumors are true, then?" asked a woman seated to the king's left. "The High Queen is not well, and you have not been able to save her, despite the magic you claim to have gained." "Save her." The words cut through Imrys like a sharp wind slicing through an open wound. He swallowed the sudden dryness in his throat and repeated the question. "Yes. Can't you save her? Won't you?" Haben still did not respond. But the answer was no, of course. He wouldn't save her, because he was the one who was killing her. The prince had known this for years, and he could hear his mother's frail voice in the back of his mind, begging him to stop talking, to stop antagonizing this dangerous man. "Swear it. Swear that you'll keep quiet about what he's doing." He could no longer swear to such things. He wished he had never agreed to keep quiet in the first place. For nearly 20 years he had kept quiet. He had built a reputation as an aloof child, uninterested in the High King's doings, or in any royal doings for that matter. But the Empire had changed after the events of the past months. He had changed. He was no child. He would not look away from the king's unnerving, blind glare, and he would not be silenced by it. The gazes in the room had shifted from him to that king. "Well?" pressed the same woman as before. She was a typical Ashnurian, with her guttural accent and the distinct glassy green color of her eyes, a common shade among the Sea clan members that dominated that westernmost province of Galaxy. Imrys spoke before the king managed to. "He can't save her. His magic will fail her, same as it will ultimately fail this empire." Several people gasped. Whispers built rapidly, both in support and opposition, it seemed, though the blood pounding in his ears made it difficult to focus on individual words. The king finally cleared his throat. "I will speak to my son in private now. The rest of you are cordially dismissed." "Majesty, about the demonstrations in Idalia. We haven't come to any conclusions about the fires in the foothill villages either. We must—" "Cordially dismissed." The guards edging the room shifted. The sounds of swords scraping free of their sheaths echoed through the dark room. One by one, the group around the table stood, bowed, and headed toward the door, filing past Imrys with a combination of hasty bows, averted eyes, and occasional glares that matched the intensity of the one the High King had fixed on him. The last one to reluctantly leave the king's side was a familiar face within the Palace of Eyes, Lord Tarek Blackburn, one of the most decorated generals in the standing Balinesian army, and one of the Ice Clan. Imrys could feel the cold energy radiating off of him as he passed. There was no obvious outward sign of a spell, but he would have sworn the frigid magic sank through him, turning his blood thick and his pulse sluggish, freezing him in place until the last of the visitors and the majority of the guards had left the room. "You've managed to do something useful for me for once," The High King rose from his silver-trimmed chair and stretched.
I was growing tired of the circular direction that conversation was traveling in.
Imrys shook free of that iciness encasing him, and he moved closer.
I want the shrouds over my mother's likenesses removed. I see.
And I also came to inform you that I intend to send for another doctor from outside of the capital city. Someone not loyal to you and your schemes. And what do you think they'll say when they see her latest wounds? The king wandered toward another table on the far right side of the room. It was actually a large, specially designed map, one that had been studied during that abruptly adjourned meeting, judging by the multiple lamps positioned around it to provide better viewing light. He felt his way along the map table's edge until he came to one of those lamps, and then he felt along the base of that until he found the knob that allowed him to brighten it.
Why waste the oil?
Imrys wanted to ask. Could the king even tell the difference between the light and the dark without his eyes? It didn't matter. More important was the fact that he still had not replied.
I know what you're doing to her,
the prince added.
And the rest of the Empire will know before I'm finished. I'll make certain of that, even if it kills me. And it very likely will.
His breath caught in his throat at the thought. But he managed to steel himself and exhale slowly, calmly. He pressed a hand to the dagger sheathed against his back, swept a glance around the room, counting the guards. Only 2 of them left, and they were both stationed at the door. Haben lifted a hand and beckoned him.
Come here. Look at this.
Irritation bristled through Imrys, but he still refused to show any outward sign of it. He cautiously moved across the room, studying the map as he approached. It was well-textured, allowing the blind king to explore every mountain and valley, along with every symbol that indicated their empire's 3 kingdoms, their further division into 10 separate provinces, and the countless cities and landmarks within those provinces. The king's jeweled fingers traced a line from Rykara, the capital city they stood in, down to the Senhara Mountains, that reached their northern terminus in the south of the Kingdom of Valen.
These fires in the foothills.
The prince knocked the High King's hand aside and stepped between him and the map.
You are changing the subject. This is the only subject. It is the only thing that matters now. Our empire is on the brink of war. It needs to know that its highest king is capable of leading it once more out of the darkness. That is my only concern at the moment. No. What they need to know is that their High King is a coward who would willingly torture his own wife in the name of gaining more power. She agreed to it. Liar.
He had heard this particular lie before, that his mother had willingly volunteered to take part in the king's plans in an effort to give him more power to secure his rule. He had stopped believing it years ago, and the king had surely realized this soon afterwards. But that had not stopped Haben from continuing to try and force-feed different versions of this same falsehood. If the High Queen of Sundolia had willingly sacrificed herself to Haben's experiments, it was only because he would have gone after her son if she hadn't. The king went back to running his hands over the map.
I am no liar. No coward, either. Which makes it all the more mysterious how I managed to have such a sniveling mouse for a son. Perhaps those rumors about your illegitimacy are not so far-fetched after all. If only.
The prince wanted to snap. But it was more complicated than that, wasn't it? As much as he loathed the idea of calling this man father, to invite any more scrutiny regarding his lineage and right to the high throne would be foolish. Once Haben was gone, there was no shortage of deranged and dangerous men and women who might take his place without a proper heir to stop them. The more that word, bastard, was thrown around, the shakier his own claim to the throne became. He had no real desire to be king, but this empire could not endure another rule like Haben's.
"You know as well as I do that you cannot deny me,"
he muttered.
"Then perhaps try honoring your father,"
the king suggested with a snarl. Suppressing the urge to reach for his dagger was causing a tight, cramping pain in Imris's forearm. He reached forward and gripped the edge of the map to keep his anxious fingers from betraying his desire to introduce his blade to Haben's throat. Such an act wouldn't be enough to kill the king. It would only make a mess. And yet...
General Blackburn brought word that the death toll in Aramarsh alone is over 200.
The king continued, in a low growl of a voice.
Soldiers wearing the emblem of the Sun King led the charge over the border. But they were not alone.
His fingers walked the distance from the southwestern edge of their empire up to the center of the Lumerian kingdom with slow, measured taps. Tap, tap, tap.
Serpent magic is said to have been being worked among their ranks. Those exiled clan members that have allegedly infested our empire once more, no doubt. Found allies waiting for them in that so-called City of Light.
Idalia, the capital city of the Lumerian kingdom, ruled by the lesser queen Eliana and King Levant of the Sun Clan. And Sunkind were not traditionally allies of Serpentkind, no. But now they had a common enemy. For years, a rebellion had been brewing in Lumeria, and the addition of powerful soldiers commanding that deadly, frightening brand of serpent magic was apparently the final catalyst, the last bit of courage they'd needed to fully declare war. The king and the prince stood silently for a moment, watching as clouds parted and allowed moonlight to stream through the window and slice a silvery path across their empire. Their hatred of one another notwithstanding, they had no choice but to agree that the situation was looking more and more dire by the day. Then the king said,
"There are also reports that a dragon was sighted in the skies above Aramarsh as it burned. Not one made of smoke, as we've witnessed in our own city, but an actual creature of flesh and blood."
And for a brief moment, Imris found it difficult to breathe. He kept his eyes on the map, swallowed several times, coughed to clear the sudden desert in his throat, but still sounded as though he had swallowed sand that roughed up his words as he forced them out.
"I've heard all the same reports. And yet they haven't prompted you to admit the part you played in unleashing these horrors over our lands. Because never mind your childish storming into my latest meeting and the damage that's done to our house and my reputation. You've done far worse things as of late. Haven't you?"
The prince let his gaze linger on the raised outline of the Verlor forest.
"I don't know what you are talking about." "I know you helped her escape this palace. What has it been, 8 weeks ago now? She should have been executed. If she had been, then much of our current mess could have no doubt been avoided.
You would only create more of a mess in its place, given enough time, the prince thought. But he held his tongue. You were in that southern kingdom when the aforementioned exiled serpent kind somehow crossed back into this world, were you not? I went south, yes, but only because I had intended to go speak with the Sun Court on your behalf. It was coincidence that I ended up so close to her, you know this. I know what you've told me. And when I heard that serpent woman was causing trouble, my soldiers and I tried to stop her. We killed one of her friends and captured the other, and now it's only a matter of time before she comes back here to try and rescue that friend from our dungeons. And when she does, I will deal with her. I've told you that as well, and it's the truth. I swear it. It was a lie, of course. Alea had not yet come to rescue her friend Sade, because it was Sade who had shot Alea full of poison, just as she had done to him that fateful day in the Verlor forest. It was Sade who had accidentally killed that other friend, too. He knew this because he had woken up in a carriage heading north, and she had been there, sitting opposite of him, repeating the same two sentences over and over. I killed him. I shot her. I killed him. I shot her. He hadn't been able to get a clear story out of her during their entire journey back to Rykara, and once they'd reached the palace, she had been hauled off to those dungeons. She had barely uttered a word to him since, no matter how often he visited her. For weeks, Imris had been left wondering if Alea was dead. But if all these latest reports were to be believed, apparently she was alive, and well, and terrorizing villages along Valen's southern border. Perfect. She couldn't just lie low and not cause any trouble for a while, could she? The king circled the map table, his robes dragging heavily along behind him. I may not have eyes, child, but there are plenty in my service who do. Continue to lie if you wish, but I already know the truth. Imris fought the urge to move out of the king's path as he circled closer. I only wanted to ask you why. When I have given you everything. The king paused and swept a jeweled hand over the table and through the moonlight. He couldn't have seen it for himself, and yet it seemed like a calculated display of wealth, the way the lanterns and moon made those rings sparkle. This palace, and all of its luxuries, all the gold to buy still more. I don't want any of your gold. Good. Because those serpents will take it all. They will steal and destroy everything. I have seen them do it. Had I not intervened, this palace would not be here. This kingdom would not be here. And my advisors fear that that serpent woman you freed is more dangerous than anything I've fought in all those previous wars. She hasn't destroyed nearly as much as you have since those wars. The king chuckled darkly. Give her time. Have you considered the fact that perhaps she only really wants to destroy you? His chuckle turned into a booming, mirthless laugh. The prince stopped fighting the urge to reach for his dagger. The feel of its warm handle was comforting. He withdrew it with the expert silence of a thief rather than a prince. It made no sound that he could hear. And yet the High King's laughter abruptly stopped, and his head tilted slightly. Not with concern, but perhaps with some interest. He took a step closer, still laughing softly. What are you planning to do, then? Help her kill me? Maybe steal my crown while you're at it? Imris held the dagger steady between them. Do you really think she can make you a...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?